Did you know that infrastructure teams can spend hours on repetitive setup and configuration that could be automated in minutes? The good news is that with tools like Terraform and BTP CLI, you can automate BTP operations consistently and at scale. Welcome, everyone. Today, we'll explore how to simplify and streamline SAP BTP Platform Management through automation, helping you reduce manual effort, increase reliability, and focus on what matters most, delivering value. Thank you for joining. We are excited to have you join us. For everyone who wanted to join episode 6 on the future of governance and compliance on SAP BTP last week, I have good news. This session will take place on October 13. If you registered for the series, you should have the details in the email I sent today. Again, please excuse the short notice. Coming back to today's session, today I have the pleasure of having Christian, Lechner, and Vipin VijayKumar joining me. And again, we have the honor of having Boris Saske moderating the chat and the Q&A part. Now, let me introduce our experts. Christian is product manager for platform automation and responsible for the topics BTP CLI and Terraform. His goal is to make the life of administrators working with BTP easier and consequently improving the experience for developers on BTP. Vipin is senior developer with SAP. He likes tinkering, trying out new things, and working with open source. And now let's dive in. Christian, please take it away.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. And let's start automating SAP BTP like a boss. So you should see the slides by now. And let's get started.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Christian?
But no.
Now.
Yeah,
yes.
Cool.
Good.
Okay, let's go. So welcome also from my side. And let's start with platform automation and with the topics of Terraform and BTP CLI. Now, kind of roughly sketching the agenda that we have. First of all, I would like to motivate why should you do platform automation? There have been some spoilers up to now, but I think there is the fair question, why should we do that? And once this motivation is there, I will explain the two flavors that you will stumble across when it comes to platform automation, namely starting from scratch, which I would call greenfield, and then starting maybe from not such a fresh playground, which is brownfield. And then, of course, we are in the year of the Lord 2026, so the obvious question is, can AI help me with anything that crosses my path there? And I will also drop some words on that topic. Now let's start with, why should I care about platform automation? Well, what we saw at customers when it comes to managing SAP BTP, so provisioning resources as well as managing the resources on SAP BTP, the status quo is summarized in those two columns. On the one hand side, most of our customers, what we see, they have manual runbooks. So they have Word documents, they have wiki pages or Jira tickets, where the setup of sub-accounts is described. Now, that's okay, but you probably agree that that's outdated as soon as the Word document hits SharePoint. And it's also super cumbersome. It doesn't scale, there is no audit trail or something like that, so that's not cool. Now, of course, you as a customer also get aware of that, and then we saw some customers who started scripting stuff. So what they did was they created specific scripts using CLIs, APIs. They even stored API call sequences in tools like Postman. Now, while this is one step forward, it's still not cool for you as a customer because you have to wrap your head around how SAP BTP works, and that's not your job. What you want to achieve is you want the most efficient way to provision and to manage resources on SAP BTP, and on top you want to have that in a compliance framework. Now, this challenge is not new in the cloud world, and if you look at AWS or Azure or Google, We see across the border that this problem basically is solved, and that's solved via infrastructure as code, namely Terraform. Now, what is Terraform? Terraform, first of all, is a tool that enables you to provision as well as to manage infrastructure. And instead of using manual processes, you manage it via code. So what you will be using when you work with Terraform is a domain-specific language that helps you in those tasks. Now you might say, yeah, okay, scripting is also code, right? Yes, but with Terraform, you define your infrastructure declaratively. What that means is you define the target state. You define, I want to have a sub account, I want to have entitlements, I want to have an environment instance. You do not define the path of getting to those resources, and you do also not define, hey, I have to wait until the sub account is created until I can create my entitlements or something like that. That's not your job, that's done by Terraform. And this is one of the positive points around infrastructure as code. And there is one more. Terraform specifically has some kind of a memory. It stores what it did last with regards to the configuration that you have given to it to the platform and stores this in its memory called state. And with this state, Terraform then executes the consequent actions. So you can think of delta updates. If you change something in the configuration, Terraform can calculate what was changed and will apply the changes only to those resources. But you can also think about compliance. If something was changed on the platform, Terraform can find out because it knows how the platform looked like once it visited it. And with those kind of technical foundation, Terraform comes with a lot of benefits, like consistency and repeatability. You define your environments declaratively, so you have no more snowflake setups. All the setups look identical. Of course, there are variants between dev and prod, but at the end of the day, it's the same. You also have a big benefit around compliance and governance. Now, as you have codified your infrastructure, you can easily enforce policies on that, maybe even codified policies. You have audit trails because everything is stored on Git. And you can define security guardrails, which altogether helps you with compliance. Next point, resilience and reliability. Now, you don't have to walk through your Word document if something went sideways and you have to set up the sub account again. Basically, you can do that by executing the Terraform script again. Of course, let's be honest, this will reduce downtimes, but creating a SAP HANA instance in the cloud will not be sufficient. You also have to bring in the data again, but at least the first steps are already done. And I think one of the most important points for you as an administrator is you are probably a small team. You have a lot of stuff to do laying on your desk, and you don't want to have to do everything manually. With Terraform, with this automation, you can easily scale your operations, and even small teams are capable of operating large fleets of infrastructure. And that's, I think, already quite cool. Besides that, so switching from the admin perspective now to the developer perspective, you as an admin can also make your developers happy because if you have set up everything automatically, this is the point in time where you can provide self-services for your developers to provision the setups you curated for them. And this, at the end of the day, will then lead to internal developer platforms. So all the provisioning, all the changes are fully automated as a self-service. With everything, with all those benefits at the back of our head, let's take a look at how this will look and feel like. Now, as you might be aware, we already cover quite some areas when it comes to Terraform. So we have BTP, we have Cloud Foundry, we have Cloud Connector, we have some modules and whatnot. Now, for the sake of this webinar, we would like to focus on two areas, namely the Terraform provider for SAP BTP, so kind of the core, and when it comes to brownfield scenarios, the Terraform exporter for SAP BTP. Now, with that, let's get started, and let's start with the greenfield approach. So up to now, all you did was setting up your platform manually or via scripts. So you now want to get started with Terraform. All new sub accounts should be set up with Terraform. How will this look like? Well, first of all, you have to understand that this setup is a journey. So in general, infrastructure provisioning and management will be an iterative approach, an iterative process. You will start with the journey, and then you will come to points where you ask yourself the questions, well, how should I do that? And there is often then the ask for a golden path or something like that. Well, there is no real golden path. That there might be definitely some good practices, but in most cases, there is no right or wrong that is completely true for everything. It really depends on your constraints, on your organization, and also on your level of maturity with dealing with automation. This is important to understand and also to kind of incorporate. What's also important is that, well, the setup will change and you have to accept that. The first try won't fit forever. So if you start with Terraform, be aware that there will be changes and that's completely okay. That's what Terraform is made for. Coming back to the first point, the iterative process, what's also important to understand if you start your journey is, well, your setup doesn't need to cover everything from day one. So if you now think, okay, I start now greenfield, I have to cover everything that is within my sub accounts with Terraform. No, you don't. Start small and grow as you go. Start with the stuff that you think is already quite mature, you can manage that. Then build trust with Terraform, build trust with the tooling, understand it, and the more you get into it, the more you can cover with Terraform. Now, once you are at that point, the funny thing is, if you start with Terraform, don't start with the code. There is some homework that you have to do first. So first of all, define your target picture by laying out who is responsible for which parts of SAP BTP. So who cares about what? Because that's important, because that also basically tells you what code you are responsible for when it comes to Terraform. Then maybe you want to refine your authorizations on BTP, because now you do the setup automatically. So maybe you don't want to have everybody with sub-account admin rights dealing with the sub-account because they might mess up your configuration. Then, very important, how should the account structure look like? So how do you want to structure your accounts? Do you want to split the development with sub-accounts? Do you want to do it with Cloud Foundry spaces? What entitlements should be there, etc., etc. So this is something that you have to wrap your head around before you start with coding Terraform. And then, of course, there is the point of governance. So you can now codify basic governance like naming conventions, labels. This will then pave the road towards a decent FinOps setup. Now that's already quite a mouthful, right? So you have to think about a lot of stuff, and the fair question is, where do I start? And here we have the SAP BTP Administrator's Guide on help.sap.com that helps you with getting things started. And we also underpinned that with samples that translated the BTP Admin Guide into Terraform. Now, don't take this as the perfect setup. This is an example based on the good practices that we think are something that you should apply, but maybe your constraints are different. So take this more as a motivation, as a first starting point, but then adopt it to your needs. Having said that, let's take a look at a concrete scenario where we will apply Terraform. So you said, okay, let's go, let's start with Terraform. And what we want to do is we as a platform team want to codify the provisioning and the management of sub-accounts, entitlements, trust configurations, and environment instances. We decided also that each sub-account corresponds to a stage. So we have a dev sub-account, we have a test sub-account, we have a prod sub-account. Then we also said, yeah, we want to have naming conventions and we defined labels. So we want to have, for example, for each at each sub-account, a cost center, a project responsible, a stage, something like that. And we also decided on entitlements. So we said, okay, there is a fixed set of entitlements that we want to apply per stage, but we give the flexibility to also add additional ones that we think are okay, but we will not automatically enforce them on every sub account. Now that's kind of the scenario. Now let's take a look how that looks and feels like in code. So let's switch to Visual Studio Code. And what you see here on the right-hand side is a typical setup of a Terraform project. First things first, you have to tell Terraform which providers you will use to do the setup. Now, in our case, this is the BTP provider in version 1.25. And then we have to configure or tell Terraform where this provider should go to. And for that, we use the global account subdomain. Now, as you can already see, this is a variable. So Terraform allows you to make things a bit more flexible by introducing variables. And as you can see here, we have a variable for global account. We have a type, string, we have a description. And what you can also see is that we can validate those variables, bringing in some more governance into setting up stuff. Let's take a look at one very specific validation, namely for the stage. We said before that we have split our development with dev test prod. We also decided to have maybe a shared account where we have, for example, HANA Cloud in there. And then we can validate this variable and saying, hey, only those 4 values are valid. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff you can do with variables. And there is one more thing. So for example, if we say, hey, I want to provision a schema environment, that's what I want. We can also cross-validate. So we can say, if you want a schema environment, then we also need the names of the schema administrators. So no more back and forth with regards to email ping pong, Teams, Slack, whatsoever. Hey, who are the administrators, whatnot. This is the information that needs to be provided, and that's validated on a code level. Now with these variables, we can then define the infrastructure. And let me shortly walk through it. We will not go into the fullest depth of the details, but just to give you a basic understanding what's happening. As I said before, we decided on naming conventions, and we put that into a so-called module. Now, a module is something like a library, a reusable building block, because the naming conventions should be the same no matter where we create our Terraform configurations. We use this module now to derive the naming conventions based on the input parameters and use it then on our resources. So for example, here we have the sub account, which is created where you can clearly see the description, the usage, the labels, all that's derived by the naming conventions. We also said we set up the trust configuration, and then we have another module for our sub accounts, for our entitlements. Because we said the entitlements are fixed per stage, and we want to provision them always, and that's also encapsulated in a module. We kind of merge that with the, let's say, a la carte entitlements that you would like to have. And then we do the entitlement. And last but not least, we also said we want to have the environments managed by Terraform. And that's done here. And as you can see, we have some kind of an if statement here, which tells you, okay, do you want a Cloud Foundry environment? Do you want a schema environment? And depending on what you requested, you will get it. Now, coming back to the idea of self-services, we of course also then want to provide the necessary information for our developers, what they need to have in order to access, for example, the Cloud Foundry environment. And for that, we have defined outputs that extract the relevant information like a Cloud Foundry API URL and hand it forward once it's provided. Now that's all the stuff that is needed for the setup that we have discussed. And if you want to learn more about what's possible, we have, of course, all the documentation on the HashiCorp registry available. So you don't need to guess what's there. You just can see what resources are there. So what can I manage via Terraform and what are the attributes that I can provide. With that, let's jump into the directory. And the first thing that we do is we initialize Terraform. So basically we download the providers. With that, we can also validate the setup. So is everything valid from a statical perspective? Yes, it is. And then we say, okay, hey, Terraform, please plan me my changes. So please tell me what will happen if I would now apply this configuration. And as you can see here, there would be 9 resources that would be created. And yeah, there are the entitlements. And as you can see here, from the module, we see what comes in. We say, okay, looks good to us. So let's do a Terraform apply. So let's apply the changes to the platform. And now it starts to create the sub account. This, of course, takes a bit, but we can already take a sneak peek to the platform. So let me refresh the browser. And as you can see, there is this sub account being created. It already has labels attached to it that we defined in our variables, which is the cost center. We say it's managed by Terraform so that it's obvious that it's not managed manually. It's the stage dev, which is also represented in the name of the sub account, and we have a sub account responsible there. That's already cool. Now we can dive into the sub account, and what we will see is that the Cloud Foundry environment is already there. A trust configuration should be created, which is here. And yeah, that's basically it. Let's check what the code says. And yeah, everything is there. All resources are added. You can see that I have the CF API URL as an output, and I can even directly jump to the cockpit because I have constructed the URL that will point me to the newly created sub account. So let's try that out for the sake of trying it out. Here we go. That's it. So as you can see, it's really quite easy to create already a setup that is not that trivial. So we have already quite some resources there. Of course, there is some work that flew into the sub account naming conventions that was wrapped in this module for the entitlements. But at the end of the day, this setup is really quite straightforward and should really pave your road to automating stuff. Let's switch back to the slides. Now you might say, okay, looks okay, but we already are on SAP BTP, right? So we are in a brownfield area, and there are different shades of brownfield. So in most of your cases, the scenario will be SAP BTP is already in use. The setup was mostly done via ClickOps. So you use the BTP cockpit or boosters or something like that, that in the later case automatically kind of created you something. And maybe you already started with Terraform and you have some accounts that are partially managed by Terraform. So you now have to wrap your head around, how do I get everything managed by Terraform? And the big question is now, yeah, where do I start in such a setup? Because that will be your second step. I would assume that you will start setting up all the new sub accounts with Terraform, and at some point in time, you will end up here. Now, the good news is that Terraform has already pre-thought this scenario. So you have the option to import existing resources into Terraform, meaning you can bring them under the management. And the good thing is that's a Terraform standard functionality. There is nothing that you have to reinvent there. And it's even better. It works, which is cool, right? However, Terraform is a generic framework. So there is no semantic knowledge within Terraform about SAP BTP. So don't expect to import your stuff into Terraform and everything will work as expected. There might be some dependencies that you have to module. There might be some changes in the code that you might want to apply to make it more consistent. But that's something that we will see in the demo. In addition, last year, HashiCorp also added a nice new feature. which is called Terraform queries, which allows you, first of all, to detect what is on the platform, and then to create the statements or the HashiCorp configuration language code that you need in order to import those resources. Now that sounds too good to be true. And yeah, as usual, there are some limitations. And yeah, every Terraform provider, so it's not just the ones that we offer has limitations, but basically every Terraform provider out there has limitations when it comes to importing resources. Now, this is not a shortcoming of Terraform per se. Everything is in place in the Terraform framework, but we of course rely on the APIs that the platform offers. Now, some resources might not support import at all because you cannot read the resource as it is on the platform. You can just create it. Sounds a bit weird, but that's how it is. Some resources also might have restrictions. So you might be able to read it, but you might not be able to read every attribute. So think about credentials that you create when setting up an instance or some other keys that you add there that are needed for the setup, but then you cannot fetch anymore from the platform. Now, the good thing is, from my perspective, that these limitations are documented. In our case, they are all documented in the provider repositories. Or if it's not possible to import at all, then it's of course also documented in the Terraform registry. So you will not run in a spot where you say, okay, I have to try it out to find it out. Everything is there, and if you have questions, feel free to contact us on the GitHub repositories. With that, how would the flow look like in a brownfield approach? Now, as for the greenfield approach, iterative approaches are always king. So don't try to boil the ocean and say, okay, I import everything now at the first step. I mean, if you are really experienced with Terraform, this might be successful, but I would not do it. In addition, the best resource that is managed by Terraform is the resource that you don't need to import. So maybe there are some historic entitlements, some stuff that is in the sub accounts that is not used anymore and should not be managed by Terraform. It shouldn't be there in the first place. So here is where tools like the BTP CLI come into place, which help you in that scenario. So analyze the stuff with the BTP CLI because this is something that scales. You don't have to click through each and every sub account. Use the BTP CLI and then clean things up. Remove what's not needed anymore. Now, if you are in a scenario in one of the shades of brownfield, where you have a partially managed account, or you have several partially managed sub-accounts, you might want to determine the unmanaged resources. So you might want to know what do I have to import and what is already there in my state file. And this can be done quite easily by using the Terraform state file at first, and then also using this new functionality of Terraform queries. Once you have done the pre-work, well, you can import the desired resources via Terraform query or a tool that we have provided that takes into account all the semantic information on BTP, which is called the Terraform exporter. And once you're done with that, you can then move forward. So maybe the import or the resource configuration is not the way how it should look like, well, then you can align it. With that, again, let's make our hands dirty and start with importing a sub-account or parts of a sub-account. For that, let's move to another folder, which is the brownfield folder. Let's see what is in there. So we have the Terraform configuration, and the Terraform configuration consists of a sub-account and a trust configuration. Okay, so what do we want to bring under the management of Terraform? Going along the storyline of the greenfield approach, we want to import the entitlements as well as the environment instances that are connected to this account. So let's shortly cross-check if this stuff is also in the state. So yeah, we have the sub-account and we have the sub-account trust configuration. that is there. And now we want to import the rest. As you remember, we first want to analyze what is there using the BTP CLI. So let me first target the BTP CLI. Or let me first log in again. Yes. Okay, now let's do a BTP target. And we want to go to the Google Webinar Dev, which is 8. Okay. Now, we know from the history of the sub-accounts that have created in our organization, well, there are probably entitlements that shouldn't be there, which is maybe a HANA entitlement, which we thought might make sense in every sub-account, which we decided against, and also KEMA entitlements that are there. Now, we could, of course, go into the cockpit and look at every sub-account, but hey, let's do it differently. So let me open my cheat sheet, because otherwise this might take quite some time. And let's do this little command with SAP BTP, with the BTP command line interface with the BTP CLI. Now, I will shortly walk you through what is happening here. So what I do now is I will list the accounts entitlements, and I have an output format, which is JSON. So I get the information about JSON, then I use JQ as a tool that is standard for manipulating JSON. And I want to check if there is some KEMA or HANA stuff in there. And when I do that, I see, okay, here we go. Within the sub account, we have those entitlements, and I don't want to have them. So let's remove them. Let's use the BTP CLI again and remove those entitlements. Now, as you might know, the BTP CLI just triggers the commands, so we have to check if everything is away, because it takes a bit. Okay, cool. So now we are on a clean slate again and can start the import. Now let's first say, okay, we might have some scenarios where the environment instance is already managed by Terraform, sometimes not, and I want to automate that. And in order to automate that, I can use this Terraform query functionality, which allows me to query the sub-accounts and check, is there a Cloud Foundry environment in there? Now, I will do that via this command. So I will create a JSON query and output it into a file. And if we take a look at the file and format it, what we will see is, okay, there is an environment instance. Now, okay, there is an environment instance. Now the question is it also managed by Terraform? And for that, I have created a little shell script that compares the state with this result of the query.json and then tells me, hey, this should be imported or not. So let's kick that off. And when I say I have created this script, it's basically Cloud Code who created it. And let's check it. Yeah, okay. So this environment instance is not part of the configuration that we have in our Terraform files. Now you might say, okay, I could have looked into the Terraform file, right? Yeah, but think about, you have 10 sub-accounts where you want to check that. Once again, jumping from one line of code to the next is not that much fun. With that, we can now import the missing resource, and we will do so by using, again, this nice cool feature that HashiCorp provided us. And we say, hey, do not only query what we just saw, but also generate me the relevant configuration to import everything. And that was quite fast. And let's take a look at that. So what was generated is, first of all, the import block, which is important to import the resources and bring them under the control of Terraform. So this is kind of what tells Terraform, hey, this is what you need to import. And then we have the configuration that we need because otherwise Terraform doesn't know how does this resource look like. Now I will copy that over to my main.tf file. And as I said before, you probably have to do some massaging of the code. So I will remove some stuff here. And I will also change the sub-account ID because we have created the sub-account ID within our configuration. So I can reference that, which then automatically also defines the sequence. Okay, then let's be brave and directly do a Terraform apply. Don't do that at home, do a planning first. But yeah, what it tells me, it wants to import one resource, which is of course the sub-account environment instance. And yeah, that's what we want to do, right? Let's check if it's in the state now. Yeah, we have one new member managed by our beloved Terraform, and that's the sub-account environment instance. Cool. So that's one option to import stuff. That's kind of the vanilla way to do it. Let me clean up things before we continue with the next option that you have. And that's using the Terraform exporter for SAP BTP. Now, this is a tool that allows you to model the flow based on different steps. So you can, for example, first create a inventory of the resources that you have that could be imported, can tailor that and then export it using this JSON file, or you can directly export it and target maybe different resources. So let's do that now for the entitlements. In order to do that, I will first create the JSON inventory. And as you can see here, I will create a JSON file. I will use the entitlements and target the sub account that is the one that is already managed by Terraform. Now this kind of does all the nitty-gritty reading stuff and creates me the JSON file. And this JSON file now tells me what entitlements are there. Now, I don't want to have all those entitlements. I just want a subset for the sake of time. And with that, I will now export all the stuff. So I will create, as before, the configuration as well as the import blocks. Now, this is a bit of a different approach. And it was there before Terraform Query was created by HashiCorp. So, however, the flow is the same. The only difference is that if you import multiple entities or multiple resources, we will try to bring in some more semantic knowledge, like combining resources, modeling explicit dependencies and whatnot. But what we see is, okay, we have three entitlements, that's what we wanted. And we have the import blocks for all those entitlements. That's cool. So let's move that over here. And then we have the resource definition that we need for the entitlements. That's also something that we want to have in our main configuration. And then we can remove this folder to be a bit more on the cleaner side. And now we can do the same game as before. So we can do a Terraform apply. It will again check if there is something to import. Of course, we have those import blocks, so it knows there should be something to import. And as you also know, entitlements always take a bit longer, but here we go. 3 entitlements. Let's import them. And let's do a state list again. And here we go. Everything is managed now via Terraform. All the stuff that we wanted to manage is managed via Terraform. From that point on, you can now work with the Terraform file as you would have. So maybe you would want to move the resources into a module. This is something that you can do. There is a third-party tool called TF Automove that then helps you with moving the stuff in the state. But that's then again even more advanced than what we did up to now. But I hope you can see that no matter where you start, it's all doable via Terraform. Even if it's brownfield, and even if it's partially managed. With that, let's move back to the slides and maybe to a chapter that you have awaited or that you have expected. We have seen now a lot of Terraform code, a lot of stuff that needed to be done, a lot of stuff for you to learn. And the question is now, can AI help me with that? Well, yes, but. So before we even start, I would like to raise the attention to some basics around using generative AI and agentic AI. The foundation for all those flows are large language model, and they are probabilistic autoregressive modules that have one job, namely predicting the most likely next token. So what they do is a non-deterministic output. This is a different ballgame than the one that you had before. Up to now, you always dealt with deterministic tools. Maybe in some places it didn't feel like deterministic, but it was. Now it's part of the game that it's non-deterministic. This means that hallucinations are an integral part of the architecture. So the module might tell you something that is simply not true. Now you might say, yeah, I can test it, and if I use Sonnet or Claude in version 4.x, and if I test it decently enough, all is good. Well, no. The LLMs have versions, that is true, but they are not pinned in the sense that nothing changes under the hood. The only thing that is pinned are the input and output parameters. So even if you have tested something, things might look different the other day. So please keep this in mind, because with having that in mind, things like LLMs can be really useful. Now, there is one more thing. When you start with Terraform, I said before, you can do a lot of stuff with policies, with bringing in guardrails like linting, with testing, with monitoring, and this is something that you should have in place. So before you start with bringing in agentic AI, please also do your homework when it comes to bringing in all the guardrails and the deterministic tools that make sure that nothing goes sideways. Now, with that, yeah, let's start with developing Terraform code because this will be part of the game. And yeah, tools like Claude Code are already quite good in writing Terraform code. The learning corpus is out there, it's all open source. So this is where the tools got trained. And this is where they are really helpful, especially if you're not writing Terraform code on a daily basis. Now, in order to bring in some more context or some more knowledge, you should wire them up with Model Context Protocol servers that are provided by HashiCorp, pointing to the HashiCorp Terraform registry, or by OpenTofu, wiring things up to the OpenTofu registry. This helps you with creating the right code. Next, there are also agent skills, which are, depending on what you want to do, loaded into your flow. There is one by HashiCorp, for example, for creating modules, and there is one by Anton Babemko. Now, you might not know that name, but he's a rock star in the Terraform as well as in the AWS world, and his skills for Terraform are really good. I would say they're even better than HashiCorp, but don't tell that to anybody. Now, even if you use the skills, make sure that you have evals in place so that things end up in the way you would want them to. And besides that, of course, you should also bring in your organizational specifics, like guidelines, best practices, examples, modules that you host within your organization and that you want to use. And of course, I would recommend use deterministic tools like tflint where possible. All the rest can go to Markdown files. That's fine. But with that, you can really speed up the Terraform code creation on your end and also improve the quality. The other side of the coin, from my perspective, are code reviews. And of course, this is also something where you should integrate agents into. As for developing Terraform code, context is king. So add the skills to the flow to support the agent, but also add the linting and tests to the flow. There are the tools that you can enhance and use. tflint for linting, Terraform test, which is unit testing for Terraform built into the Terraform framework. So make sure that that stuff is executed and that the results are available to the agents, because that will improve the overall quality. Last but not least, of course, it's tempting to kind of make it more autonomous and say, yeah, if this is small changes, yeah, let's do auto approvals. I would not start with that, so keep the human in the loop. If you're really confident and if you have a lot of policies in place that get evaluated, maybe in some scenarios, yeah, auto approval is completely fine. But I think in a lot of cases, it's still quite good to have a human in the loop. And the last scenario that I would like to highlight is troubleshooting, because this is also something that you will stumble across when you deal with Terraform, but also with the BTP CLI. So let tools like Claude Code explain, for example, the result of a Terraform plan. If you don't get it, so if you say that looks super weird, why does it look that way? Well, give it to Claude Code with the setup that I've mentioned before for developing and let it explain to you. If you detect a drift and there are some weird side effects that you don't understand, give it to Claude Code with the MCP and it can explain it to you probably. This will help you in understand and will speed up your troubleshooting. What's also super useful is if you run into errors, just copy the error to the agent and ask him how to fix it. This is fair for Terraform, but this is also fair for BTP CLI. So we have learned that, for example, the BTP CLI documentation is quite good. So Claude can really help you with crafting BTP CLI commands and also help you troubleshooting the commands. And now there is one important point here. Even if the tool does not find the right solution, it might bring in a new perspective that helps you finding the right solution. So that's something that I personally experienced quite often, that maybe the solution is not quite right, but it helps me to come to the right path. What's also important and to stress here is, well, always make sure that you identify the root cause, because agents are maybe a bit on the side of shortcuts. So they want to fix the thing, they want to be helpful, but maybe they then just duct tape something. So make sure that you identify the root cause, make sure that you challenge the agent to find the root cause. And then this is also super helpful in troubleshooting Terraform code. With that, let me shortly summarize what you have heard in the last 45 minutes. I hope you have seen that Terraform and BTP CLI, and especially the combination of them, are powerful tools to automate your platform setup based on industry standards. There is a side effect to that, and that's a positive one. This automation also improves governance, compliance, and developer experience. So that's, I think, a win-win situation for everybody. And what's also important and what we could hopefully show you is that no matter where you are in your journey in using Terraform, greenfield, brownfield, somewhere in between, you can get started with platform automation. The tools are there, the documentation is there that helps you with that, and looping in AI might even get you then through the door and or from the starting line and help you with setting up a decent platform automation. Having said that, AI is definitely there and should be used to support you. But keep in mind that it's not the holy grail. It has some shortcomings and you have to be aware of them. At the end of the day, it's just an amplifier. So if you have no idea about Terraform, if you have no idea about automating stuff with Terraform or importing resources, well, then you might not end up in a good place. But if you have some basic confidence, if you have set up a solid foundation with deterministic tooling, then AI can really give you kind of the turbo boost to move forward and get even more out of platform automation. And with that, we are at the end of this session. So folks behind the scenes, let me know if there are questions.
Yeah, hi, Christian, thanks a lot for the session. Of course, there were a lot of questions. Thanks everyone for coming up with those. And yeah, I see it's still ongoing. I mean, Vipin already did provide some answers there. Nevertheless, there were was the question concerning the resources that help to improve getting into the topic. I mean, especially around Terraform and so on. I'm not sure if that are part of those are part of the slides we can share later on.
Not of the slides, but of course. So as we are open source, everything is out there. So we have no hidden agenda. We have a GitHub page that serves as a landing page. It's under, I will put it in the slides afterwards, Terraform landing page for BTP. And here you can find all the resources like where to get started. And we have a free learning course on learning.sap.com about getting started with Terraform and SAP BTP. This course targets folks who are quite used to BTP, so they know what's going on there, but have no idea about Terraform. So that's kind of the perfect starting point for that. And of course, we have a lot more stuff there, like further webinars and where can you find sample code and so on.
Thanks a lot. That's very helpful for sure. And I mean, you can also find the link in the chat. Thanks, Vipin, for providing that, right, in parallel. It's good that we do both things, also tangible then. Then there was the question if we have any ideas how data consultants could benefit from that. I think of course, it might also depend on what their actual scope of the role is, if they are also due to then provide corresponding test environments or whatever. But not sure if you have further ideas there for SP data consultants use cases, if you stumbled over those. But I think
so. It really depends, as you rightfully pointed out, on the concrete role and the responsibilities that the consultant has, and I think also to some extent to the adoption level on BTP. Of course, if you ask me, I'm super biased, but I also know how to craft Terraform code. Is from day one on start with Terraform. You don't have anything to lose. But I fully get that some folks start with the cockpit and at some point in time want to switch over to Terraform. So maybe it's also a question of when, not only of who and who's responsible, but when to deal with the stuff. Because if the adoption grows, and we saw that at some customers, it gets more and more difficult to do things via ClickOps. And then, it might be the right time to take a look at the learning.sap.com and then check that out. For example, for setting up sandboxes. I mean, what could be easier than setting them up by the click of a button?
Agreed. Thanks a lot, Christian. And although already answered now in the chat as well, I mean, I think that's also a core question where it has been brought up. We have fund participants with over 200 sub-accounts managed by ClickOps. Just to clarify again, if you want to start using Terraform for new sub-account creation, will there be any impact to the already created sub-account? Right.
So, no, there is no impact. So you cannot say Terraform is stupid or Terraform is super cool, because it does not care about what is there already. It just cares about what you have defined in your configuration and what is there in the code. So maybe I shortly switch there. So it only cares about the stuff that is there. And of course, here in this state file that you should never open like this. But if there is now another entitlement, if there is a, let's say, service instance that is in this sub account, it's not configured here, and Terraform is completely blind. So it doesn't know that it exists. There is no side effect. Also, same for role collections or something like that. Now, this is, of course, the advantage if you want to start with Terraform in such a setup. But this is also kind of then the disadvantage once you want to import it. Because then you have to do some kind of either import everything or do the stuff that I showed with finding out what is managed, what is not managed, and then move forward. But yeah, that's you can start without any side effects there. Maybe I wouldn't start on production, but yeah.
Thanks. Sure. Sounds good. Then we have, of course, also, our discussion. I mean, you also now did point out Cloud Code and so on. I mean, of course, we have also still Joule, right? I mean, it's clear that, it's further evolving and so on. I'm not sure if it makes sense now to discuss that as part of general discussion rather. But
yeah, I mean, let's be honest. At the end of the day, at this point in time, I would say when it comes to commercial models, Claude Code is kind of the go-to resource, and I think it's super good for Terraform code. It's good for everything else. We can discuss now also about sovereignty. So I mean, all the open weight models like Kim or DeepSeek, they are also good, and they're open weight. And of course, you have Claude Code that also Claude Code, pardon me, Joule, which is getting better and better. And at the end of the day, one part is this tooling per se, the other part is the LLMs, and the last puzzle piece that you need is the tooling that you provide to it. So even with Claude Code alone, you can of course create code for BTP, and there is already quite some stuff baked into the learning corpus. That's what we see, but it's not perfect. It's a bit opinionated toward AWS. So you might end up with a Terraform configuration for BTP with AWS regions. And this is then where you have to hook in the MCPs, where you have to bring in the skills. But at the end of the day, hey, it doesn't matter. I just use, honestly, Claude Code. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
Thanks. And then, there were several comments around, why no discussion around GitHub Actions there comparing that, current offering is rather wrapper for BTP and Cloud Foundry command line interface. I mean, of course, I think.
So I mean, that's kind of the idea of Terraform, right? So what I've shown today is all on the console, all done manually. That's not how you would do it. You would bring it into a CI/CD environment. And of course, every provider is kind of a wrapper around APIs. So in our case, it's the BTP CLI, rightfully for BTP. It's the CFGO client for Cloud Foundry, and it's the naked APIs that are available for the Cloud Connector, for example. Now, the beauty of Terraform is that, or the Terraform CLI is that it's unopinionated. So the Terraform CLI is there as an executable. I think for now, most of the OSs, they also did some fancy super old Linux stuff now that they support. Or terminal stuff, no idea why. But now you can use that and bring that into the pipeline of your choice. So I'm aware of a lot of customers who use GitLab for that. I'm also aware of customers that use GitHub for that. Bitbucket, Bamboo, or anything that is self-hosted, hey, just use it. Or Jenkins. I mean, you can even use Jenkins for that. So this is kind of a different building block from my perspective, but the beauty of Terraform and also OpenTofu is that it's unopinionated. It does not force you into an ecosystem that is then very hard to come out of it. So if you now decide to go to GitLab, but then you want to switch, it's just redefining the pipelines, and it's not redefining your Terraform code.
Thanks a lot, Christian. That really fits, I would say. I mean, of course, happy to discuss further. Apart from that, as we are almost at the top of the hour, you can bring it up still further questions, right? But in parallel, I would take the opportunity just again to bring up briefly and let me overshare.
I can also do that.
You did it. You had it as part of the slides. Excellent. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Maybe not only terraforming like a boss, but also presenting like a boss.
We had the slide change there, right? I mean, we now have the next one.
Then you have to share. Sorry for that.
Apologies. No worries.
Not so boss-like.
Here we go. You could not be aware of. So here you see that we will now have a short break, meaning summer vacation time, right, everyone? And then we'll continue back in September at the time with Cloud Foundry and Cuba runtime details there. Then we will have a session about notifications and connectivity. And as Tania outlined, we were happy to find a new slot then for the secure, compliant, and AI-ready topic, which we had to shift due to technical reasons to the end of the series. But again, do take the chance to register. Here is again the link we did also provide there, and then looking forward also to welcome you to those upcoming sessions. Let me check back. Just stop sharing and then check back in the chat. There were some further discussions about how to do that. Sure, I mean, yeah, I mean, when you're very familiar with GitHub Actions, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do also with those chain, but as Christian outlined, I mean, the point here is rather to have that. You already did.
I would like to add to that. So, yeah, of course, you can use CLIs, APIs, Playwright, MCP, whatnot, Claude, and you name it, and tools that others use in order to somehow construct your setup and bring things together on your own. Nobody's preventing you from that. If you want to do that, hey, feel free, be my guest. But be aware that probably you will only provision stuff. That probably management might be difficult to do with this setup. Because you shoot against the platform, you create it, but what then? Do you store the results on your own? Do you implement state handling yourself? Do you do implementing the planning steps on your own? I don't think so. I mean, of course you can do that, but yeah, that's really reinventing the wheel. And yeah, I mean, we can discuss, or one could discuss that, but I don't see the value there.
No, thanks a lot, but thanks a lot also for the open discussion, right? I mean, that's what we are here for, to have
of course.
that, and really appreciate it. With that, I would say we reached the top of the hour. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Thanks a lot for you, Christian and Vipin, for the great session. And back to you, Tania.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, let me express from my side a heartfelt thank you, Christian, for providing such valuable insights and exciting developments that have been and will come. And as Boris already mentioned, yes, we will have a short break, but return on September 17th. And wherever you are in the world, we wish you a wonderful and refreshing month ahead. And we definitely look forward to reconnecting with you in September. Thank you for being with us and see you soon. Bye-bye.